Well, here's a sort of a strange story. The story must have happened about 50 years ago, maybe more. There were boys from Chabad that went into the streets of Manhattan and on Friday and asked people if they're Jewish. So it so happened that there was a French fellow, maybe in his 20s, mid 20s, and he was wanted to get involved in politics in France, or maybe he was already involved in politics, but it was totally not religious. Totally not religious. He had totally become estranged from Judaism. It could be that even his parents were minimally so. So he was walking on the street. One of these boys stopped him and asked him if he's Jewish. So he said, "Yes, he is. Would you like to put on tefillin?" He said, "No, I don't think so. I don't. No reason to do that. What is it?" He says, "Tefillin. Just put them on." He said, "Oh yeah, he remembers his grandfather did it. He's a Moroccan Jew. So like in Morocco, all the Jews were religious until there came in the Alliance, the French, they say, atheistic education system, and that really sort of confused the Jewish identity of the Moroccan Jews. So he was one of them. So he said no, he doesn't want to put on tefillin, and the boy talked to him, and etc. And finally, he's the young man. They get into a conversation, and the young Chabad boy, asked this fellow, what's your name? His name is Mikhail, and what's he doing? He says, well, he's here for political reasons. He wants to meet people. So the young boy just made something up, and he said, "Oh, you want to meet people that are into politics? You have to go. Have you ever heard of the Lubavitcher Rebbe?" Now the fact is it wasn't a complete lie because at the Lubavitcher Rebbe, there are a lot of important people that go there. So to the Brahmin, then on Sundays the Rebbe would pass out like thousands of dollars. He would pass out the dollar bills to people. So we went there, and so he said, "The Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, where is this?" He said in Eastern Parkway. I said, really? He knows there's, he said, oh yeah, all the politicians go there. So this French fellow, he was a nice young man, and he was starting to get interested in Judaism. So he put on tefillin, and he said, listen, if you want to, next Sunday is going to be dollars. Give me your address where you're staying in the hotel. I'll call you up and I'll take you there. So he figured, this Michael, he figured Mikhail, whatever his name was, he figured that Michelle. Anyway, so he figured that the young boy is probably not going to get in contact with him, but in fact he did. And it came Sunday, and the young man called him up, and he even said, "I'll come down to Manhattan to your hotel, and we'll go together." So they went to. You sure there's going to be politicians there? He said, "Yeah, sure. All sorts of people come. There's politicians. That's the place you have to go." So he goes there and he gets in line, and there's like a huge line. There's like thousands of men in one line, and thousands of women in another line, and they're all going past the Rebbe. And the Rebbe like gave everybody $1. The intention of giving the dollar was to encourage giving charity. The people would just like the Rebbe gave him, so he would give others. But also the Rebbe would give small blessings to people and sometimes talk to them. Of course, there were thousands of people, so the Rebbe couldn't spend that much time with them. Okay, so this Mishael, he comes in front of the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said, yes. He gives him $1, and he looks at the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said, what's your name? So he says, my name is Mishael. He says, well, what's your Hebrew name? So he said, well, I don't know. I don't know if I have a Hebrew name. I never heard such a thing. So the Rebbe said, listen, go back home, ask your grandmother what your Hebrew name is, and come back here. And come back on Sunday. So he said, okay. Meanwhile, the young man who brought him there, he sort of disappeared. But this Mishael, he was really sort of enchanted with the Rebbe. It was really something. And not only is telling he was a Jew, he has a Jewish name. These are things were not really important to him in France. So we went and he called up his grandmother, and he asked her, what's my name? She said, is everything okay? What do you have to know your name? So he told her the whole story. So next Sunday, he came back to the Rebbe, and he said, I asked my grandmother, and my grandmother says that my name is Menachem Mendel. That's my name, Menachem Mendel. So he wasn't a Moroccan Jew, after all. He was Menachem Mendel, or either that or his great grandparents called him Menachem Mendel. But in any case, he was an Ashkenazic Jew, and he didn't know anything about Judaism whatsoever. That sort of explains it. Anyway, so the Rebbe said, "Listen, you have to start putting on tefillin." So he starts getting interested. This is Michelle. He gets more and more interested in Judaism. Starts putting on tefillin, and he gets connected to Chabad, the representative that's nearby him, and he starts really getting interested in Judaism, and he starts keeping Shabbat all because of his name. So he said, but it was little by little. It wasn't exact. The most difficult thing for him, says this Michel, he tells the whole story, was that food. In France, there's this fine cuisine, and he really likes, and there's seafood. There's all these oysters and clams or whatever things they have over there, and lobster under glass, whatever they eat over there in France. They have this big thing about food and schlepping on a meal like for 3-4 hours, and eating hors d'oeuvres and sub hors d'oeuvres, and then fine brandy, and then this and then more hors d'oeuvres. Anyway, so he meanwhile he's succeeding in business, and he meets this big businessman, and they go to eat together. Now meanwhile, this Mishael, he's like putting on tefillin, and he's keeping Shabbat as much as he can, Shiva Shabbat. But the food thing, that's a thing that's it's sort of like untouchable. That's in his realm, and the Torah is not going to come into that. That's like no man's land or whatever, no God's land. So he's sitting there, and so they order food. He and this big businessman. It's going to be a big business deal that he's going to land with this man. So he wants to make a good impression, and they order hors d'oeuvres and then pre-hors d'oeuvres and whatever it is. I don't know exactly how it goes over there, but the meal is like 10 courses meal, whatever. It's a fine restaurant, and so they're sitting there and they're sipping with the brandy or whatever. And the man that's sitting with him, he said, "Tell me, are you Jewish?" So he said, "Yeah, I happen to be. I am Jewish. It could be that years before he would deny it, but he said, yeah, I'm Jewish." He said, "Tell me something interesting. I want to show you something." He takes out from his pocket a newspaper, and there's a picture of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And he said, "Who is this man?" And it's very, very interesting. Meanwhile, they bring him the, whatever it is, lobster or octopus under glass, whatever things that they eat, some sort of thing that he really loves. And he's about to dig in because he's really hungry also. And suddenly sees this picture of the Rebbe. And the Rebbe's like looking at him, and he thinks, man, it's too bad you didn't bring that picture out after the meal. But he's starting to think, I can't eat this food. The Rebbe's going to miss me. So all of a sudden he realizes, listen, that's my rabbi. That's my rabbi. That's the Rebbe, Lubavitcher Rebbe. And he's a very great man. And he wants to bring peace into the whole world, and etc. And he starts to explain to him the things. Meanwhile, he says, listen, I got a stomachache. I can't eat the meal. And that's how Michel became a totally observant Jew. First of all, with the help of the Rebbe's representatives, and secondly, this person who pulled out the picture of the Rebbe and forced him to explain the topic. So it'll be, that happened in a small way, but it'll happen in a big way, that same way, that the whole world will turn to understand that there's God that's creating everybody, and God is really good, and that the world is really good, and that all we have to do is go according to the manufacturer's instructions, and we'll see that Mashiach is here. Have a good day with Mashiach now.